Good evening, and welcome to Into Infinity Talk. I'm your host, Kevin Koerber, and my guest tonight is William Keifer. William is back for part 2 in our series of exploring the solar system. How you doing, William?
I'm doing all right, Kevin. Good evening, everybody. Time to get on to part number 2. We're in the beginning, and we've got quite a bit of ways to go.
Right. Yes, because tonight we're going to be having a little discussion about colonization.
Yeah, good old colonization. And before we really go and start, I do want to say for our viewers, please, whatever you do, do not take away what you're hearing from this as concrete fact. This is going to be definitely a lot more of an opinionated type thing. There are hundreds of ways that you can go about colonization. Some ways may work, some ways may not work. Just please do not go and be like, this is the concrete way, it's the only way that can possibly happen.
Right. Starting off with colonization, I guess a good place would be Earth's satellite, the moon.
Oh, yes. The moon, Luna, our ever continuous stalker in the sky, constantly watching us.
Right.
It's always been captivating, and it's amazing to sit there and think. I mean, back in the 1960s, there were people walking around on there, early 70s, and we haven't been back since. But that seems to be soon to change. In quite recent news, I don't know if any of you all went and heard. You can go on to, astronomy and different space news. I mean, NASA even talked about it itself, but they recently did a scan for minerals and stuff like that and have found some very promising potential spots that mining could be definitely will be quite decent for any corporation that would decide to go up there to go and do much of anything. But once they get up there, not how they get up there, but once they get up there, there's going to be a few problems, and they are going to need to do some colonization, at least have a part-time base crew or a full-time. Full-time would be definitely a lot more beneficial because you can have constant work going through, or you can also cycle them out, I guess, but it would still be some form of colonization. You have a short term and a long term. Let's first go off of the short term. The short term I like to refer to as we are now living underground. One of the main things that will have to be taken into consideration when it comes to colonizing any sort of new planet, regardless of where you are, is the giant burning murder sun that is trying to kill you constantly through its cosmic radiation. So you're going to have to make sure that you're not directly in it constantly. Whenever they were on the moon and all that, they didn't have to worry about it due to the sheer fact, well, they did, but they didn't have to worry about it in the same degrees that people who would be on it 24/7 would have to. They still had radiation to go through, a number of other issues. Going into the interior, most likely through one of the craters, one of the lower points, and then drilling down and basically make a pretty large borehole, enough to land your ships and stuff into so they can go in and then go out and then make like hangars and a whole bunch of different little places, basically a spaceport down into it. And then from there, it would be basically multiple types of giant airlocks would be a nice analogy for it, where you would pressurize each section of it and you would have multiple layers before you got into the actual interior. And then there would be the colony. And you could have air generators and stuff, basically what we like to also call a bunch of plants. You can easily take a bunch of full spectrum lights. It's what they do in greenhouses, in indoor greenhouses. You just have fakes. Basically, it just replicates the generation of the sun, encourages plants.
So what you're saying is by putting it underneath the moon's surface, you're going to be protected somewhat from cosmic rays and not really give your position away either, right?
Well, that too. I mean, especially if you were trying to do something a little more illegal. But you could easily have it in there. Wouldn't have to worry about the sun trying to murder you. You've got a whole bunch of rock protecting you, and that's the best thing to go with radiation. It's just you go down to the point where it's not coming through anymore. You will have to deal still with zero gravity situation. Going back and forth. It's not quote unquote a zero gravity, but I guess the further you would get it, actually, it wouldn't be a guess. It would be quite a bit more. The closer you get into the planet, it should increase the gravity ever so slightly. Probably not by much, but you would jump pretty high, just basically what the Apollo would have to go and do. And you would have to be pretty darn careful. Make sure you don't, just jump up and come down in the middle of a flying car or whatever they happen to go and use.
Right. So that's like a 1/6 our gravity, right?
I believe so. I don't have the math right in front of me, but it should be around that. Now, when it comes to the interior colonization, like I said, expanding and all of that, you would eventually have enough rooms for quote unquote ceiling to floor skyscrapers where it would go up and down completely to the roof, go clear across. You would have vehicles going. You could everything you could do on Earth would just be a little more complicated. I mean, if you jump your car, it's going to hang in the air a little longer. And like I said, you can use air and different things, transport earth, proper usable soil, and put it into if you need to for, but being that the moon is mostly earth, we said in the last episodes, they slammed into the side of the planet and coalesced and formed into the moon, and into a short version of that. Now, some of the uses, though, when it comes to the colonization, is it will be mostly mining when it comes to the moon. There will be some that will be quote unquote just cities, but for the sake of this, let's refer to it as a hive because basically it's very similar to what ants would go and do. You would have a bunch of canals, etc., that would be going through into larger living spaces. Each like little room area would be more and more specialized. You would have an area that would just be for mining, an area just for agriculture, an area for research, an area just for record,
So what
parks.
you're saying is the selling point of a base on the moon is mining.
That will be the first thing, most likely. Yes, it will be straight out mining. There, we already know, being that the moon is a good bit of Earth, there should be rare earth metals on the moon. Now, you would have to do a bunch of surveys, expeditions, but you will eventually find it. I mean, you could even say that it could be crazy enough that there could be oil, which now that's
Well, that's a
pretty.
selling point right there.
Oh yeah. Now I will admit completely that could be a good bit far fetched, and even for me, like sitting here after I said it, it's like, oh yeah, that there was no biological life for it to degrade down into for the moon. Well, for what we know, I mean, you never truly know. Back at a certain point, it could have been covered up by all the micrometeors, but it could have had for a very very short amount of time the ingredients for life. Who knows?
That's right. We don't know unless you were actually back during the formation of the Earth. And you mentioned, I think, in the last episode, how the moon came about anyway.
Yeah, that's the more accepted theory is Thea. I mean, there are some rival theories, which I'm not 100% versed on a lot of them, but the Thea impactor is the one that I'm mostly put myself back to because it just makes sense.
I'm with you on that.
Now, whenever I go on and think about other things when it comes to colonization, like I said, we have living space because people will eventually start going up there, taking families, making families. One of the things that I have a feeling that will be artificial gravity, some sort of generation when it comes to it, even if it's just let's use our imagination real quick. Imagine a really strong piece of metal welded to the floor, and on it you have a normal building structure, and suspended from it, spinning slightly at enough, you would have to do the math and find, depending on the space, but spinning on this thing, you would basically have habitation blocks, and they would be moving and spinning, and it would be generating enough spin for gravity, spin gravity. You see it all the time in sci-fi shows and stuff like that.
Right. I
You
think one of the most famous scenes would be for moviegoers would be what was it? 2001: Space Odyssey.
Oh yeah, I mean, before Hal started killing them all.
Right.
But you would basically have living structures. You would have the central tower, and then you would have the habitation blocks. That way, you could still go back and then sit down, and then you could. I wouldn't recommend staring out if you get motion sickness very easily, but you could look out and see your inner blocks move around. Maybe they will have some sort of a technology to create a gravity bubble of some sort when it comes to this sort of conditions. You never know. Another thing that you can go and do, like I said, since you're already drilling down into the interior, and then make some sort of a containment unit, and then inside the containment unit would be like artificial gravity or something like that. Some sort of technology that somebody, like we're sitting here right now, we're thinking about it. Do I have the know-how of even starting to do it? No. Does somebody else who's studied and have a lot more of the know-how about it? Yeah, eventually, if it's possible. And anything's truly possible. It takes the time, effort, and the consideration, and you do not close your mind off to things. Science would have died in its infancy.
Yeah, because you're always you have the idea, And like you said, maybe not necessarily knowing how to put it together, but that's when you get people that's what they focus on. And to realize that, to make a colony on the moon.
Oh, yeah. Now, one of the big problems, though, when it comes to that is it's going to be short term. That is still, like I said, without an actual gravity source, even living inside of it, it still gives you limitations, etc. When it comes to having the moon hive. You would need a long term solution. And this comes to what it would be the long term solution, and that is actual terraforming of the moon.
Wow. How would you go about terraforming the moon?
Well, actually moving the materials, etc., to it, that would be a huge undertaking. Terraforming any body, whenever the first one that we go and do, will be without a doubt the largest undertaking that we have done as a species.
Right.
The first thing that you would have to go and do when it comes to the moon, and it would even be, at least with the Mars, you have something that you're working with. The core is not completely dead on Mars. The moon, if it even has a proper, can't see me doing air quotes here, but I'm doing air quotes, core.
I can see you doing.
You would need to have that core, as I was saying in the last episode, you need to have a core and have it spinning and working to generate a magnetic field. And you need to have some sort of a magnetic field strong enough to keep the sun from murdering you. It will constantly bathe you with radiation. So you need something that will divert that radiation around. Now, there could be some unforeseen consequences of that. We don't know. Some of those consequences, it might end up directing it back onto our magnetic field, and then we might have a different spot for the aurora, being that it's so close. But some of the moons of Jupiter have a magnetic field, even though they're overpowered by Jupiter's, so I don't think that would be truly a problem. But first, we have the magnetic field. We somehow figured out how to simulate, generate, or cause spinning of some sort, a core in the moon. The second thing that you would have to do is take the stuff that will grow on the moon, find it, test it, find locations that would be suitable for it, and start planting, start bringing Earth material to the moon.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Would all this be like a precursor to going, say, to Mars? Even this would be like a temporary thing, basically to learn how to do it, how to terraform a world.
Honestly, you would probably terraform Mars first, since it's the easier one to do, unless they somehow made some sort of a technology to do an artificial core. And then you would, like, if they already had that, then yeah, go ahead, do the moon first. But I have a feeling that if they are going to terraform anything within the solar system, it is either going to be the moon or Mars, and most likely Mars, since, like I said, outside of it being a little bit further, by the time that you're actually doing this, the travel should not be truly a major issue, because technology would have advanced enough that you are considering it. And to consider it, you would have to do something with the travel time. But like I was saying, you would start with the heavy duty planting and things like that. So you would have the air start to be generated. But before you would even do that part, you need something that will produce what the plants are going to be eating. The plants cannot generate oxygen out of nothing. They need, carbon dioxide and some other things. So basically, for everybody who says that global warming is not happening, go to the moon and just go nuts. Just go absolutely nuts, because that's basically what you would have to do. You would have to have huge amounts of carbon emissions to a point where you would be doing acidification.
Here's the thing. If you do something like that on the moon, that's one thing, because the moon has basically no atmosphere. But if you do it on Mars, shouldn't we make sure that there's no residual life already there before you even begin to terraform Mars?
When it comes to Mars, and I'll touch on it a little bit earlier, a little bit of a spoilers, we are going to get to Mars, so look forward to that a little bit further on in the podcast. But anyways, I will say that will be one of the largest, if Mars has residual life on it, it will be one of the biggest debate points and moral questions of our species, because when we terraform Mars, and it does have residual life, unless it's close to or of Earth type life, it will die out.
Right.
Mars.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, Mars' original biome will die off if there was any of it left.
Right.
So it would be a giant ethical debate. And the largest moral question our species at the time would have to go and oversee. Now, I did skip a step, and I would have completely overlooked it for some reason until you went and said it. We would also have to generate an atmosphere, and like I said, just atmosphere generation sites and things, just basic essential gases, being that after a gravitational field and such would be there, it would eventually capture and it's going to be a slow process. You're not going to see it done in like 50, 20, 30 years, something like that. No, it'll probably take a couple hundred, especially.
Okay, one other thing, when you're talking about the moon, especially us here on Earth, we only see one side of the moon. Does the moon actually have to rotate?
Well, the moon rotates very, very slowly. It's tidally locked to us, but not to the sun.
Right.
It's just that slow rotation. It keeps the one side facing us. So, yes, it is rotating, but as you saw when the Apollo astronauts did land, it doesn't mess with spin gravity is only necessary for something that's extremely small, because then you're just using the sheer velocity of your rotation to simulate you standing on something. Because let's just go and say if suddenly the floor disappeared from underneath of you during a spin gravity and you somehow did not get chopped in half by the sheer rotation, you would just go flying off into space.
Right.
Now, after the atmosphere and the carbon monoxide and all of that's going to be in there, and you got your plants growing, now you would have artificial watering. By this point, there would be enough moisture that would have been introduced that you would have the rains come. And this would introduce the oceans to the planet. Now, luckily, the moon does have water on it. There is ice at the bottom of some of the impact craters. So, in theory, and I believe that there is probably more water locked underneath of the moon. It's had a lot of impacts. It could have been shoved down into a lot of the cracks. So by this point, any of the water that is in the moon will start to rise up. We would also have to bring liquids with us. Now, water itself is easy to generate because all it is just hydrogen and oxygen mixed together. And bingo, you have water.
Right. Well, where would this water come from? Would it be during the early solar system? Again, the moon is heavily cratered. Would it come from like comets?
You mean the water that's already on it?
Again, not talking about water as in the form of ice in the craters, but in order to make like lakes and oceans, wouldn't that water have to come from someplace else?
I mean, yes, you could go and borrow comets.
Comets.
You could grab them. Yes. You could grab them and pull them in and have them run into it, or generating and actually producing hydrogen. Artificial hydrogen, I believe, is a thing. I do believe that they have generated artificial hydrogen, and you could generate artificial oxygen. Like I said, with plants, they generate it all the time. So all you'd have to do is just capture pure oxygen, introduce it with hydrogen. Bingo, you have water. So
Bingo,
you can produce
water.
Yeah, you can produce water on a huge scale. Like I said, this is going to be the largest undertaking. You can capture and introduce water-rich comets, asteroid, and ice from the other sections and bring that in to hurry up the process. But once your water is established and it's dealt with its stuff, you would want to introduce algae from Earth. So any of the water that is on the planet, being that there is so much carbon during the colonization process as it becomes more and more Earth-like, the atmosphere, you would want to have the algae in there so it would help clean up the oceans and get rid of the acidification that would be happening. It does clean it, just very, very slowly. Then you would want to choose some desirable critters, some things that could survive under that sort of conditions. And like I said, possibly if we have artificial forms of increasing the gravity on the moon to make it to Earth levels, then you wouldn't have to worry about what you brought to it. But then you could start bringing fish, different animal life, of course, more people. So it is Earth's biome expanding and taking over our neighbor.
Well, actually, how on Kardashev scale, what would that make our civilization then?
We would still be a type 1 civilization. I mean, right now we're a type 0, and it would
Right.
be a type 1 because we would have to do this, we would have to have also mastery of Earth itself. Now, not saying like, oh, control the weather and so. It's just we would be able to generate non-fossil fuels, not be dependent on how it goes. We harness every bit of what is capable of the planet, power wise, resource wise, is all harnessed. Every little bit of it. We're capable of also changing it a little bit for the better, changing out different sections, refilling water zones that have been unfortunately a bit drained. You can take a look at a lot of different lakes and stuff like that. Basically fixing a lot of the damage that we have done to it. But yes, it would be a type 1 civilization would be able to do that and colonize most of the solar system. By the time you were actually done colonizing, terraforming, and shaping the solar system, then you would move to a type 2. So we would be in the early phases of a type 1 civilization doing this.
And like you said, the end result would probably be upwards to 100 and some years from now if we started now.
Oh, if we were to start right now and somehow found a way, like I said, to do the core and all that, just say, throw out of your mountain, we're using the imagination. But if we were to start right here at this moment, yeah, it would probably be closer to maybe 300 years. And that is giving the biggest benefit of the doubt.
That's a conservative figure, yeah.
It's probably going to take even longer. But then you have the benefit of you could go outside and have a lovely picnic under some tree and watch the moon. I mean,
yeah, and you would hear the stories about people that were your ancestors when they would go outside and have a barbecue and look up at the sky. It didn't look the same. It was a barren, cold world.
Go and watch the earth rise up, and then you would also have to think that there would be billions upon billions of people looking back at you too from the earth.
Right.
Plus, all that would be such a different change. I mean, it's hard to imagine, and
that's a game changer right there.
Because we would be looking from Earth, and we would see something with oceans and stuff just right up there. It's something to really go and think about.
Right.
It would be
visually, it would be stunning, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. And being that the way that the moon is, if there is intelligent life that is monitoring this solar system, right then would probably be the moment that they might consider contacting, because we had just done something that no matter what you would go and sit there and think, in my opinion, that would probably be worth of notice.
Right.
Because that is an endeavor. Now, we've talked about the long term and the short term. We now have the moon right where we want it. It's another beautiful blue pearl. But as you mentioned a little bit earlier, there's another target, something that's fascinated humanity since we were in our cradle stages during the Stone Age.
And we're talking about Mars.
The red dot, Mars itself, the god of war. Mars will be slightly easier than the undertaking that we just did with the moon. Like I said, in the early stages, it's still going to be much of the same. You're going to find a spot, you're going to dig in, and you're going to be underground. As we alluded to in the last episode, underground settlements are going to be the first ways of having permanent settlements. Now, when it comes to Mars, you're going to be able to walk around and do a few things a little bit easier, since the gravity is a little bit more intense. Right. Plus, for the sake of argument, let's just say that they're going there for mining as well, just for the sake of keeping it on the same page. You would have, wherever you decided to set up your mining colony or whatever, let's just say that the one that we're going to talk about is up at one of the polar areas where the ice is, and they are mining particularly ice to send down into the further areas of the planet where they're mining materials and stuff like that. You would dig down, you would get into it, and then you would carve out these giant catacombs, taking the ice, turning it into water, shipping the water down, sending it down, getting your ships to come, so on and so forth. You would see Earth and the moon, the two little blue dots, since we're going off that, the moon's been terraformed and all that. So you would see that. So you would have resources coming from the moon and the Earth at this point. It would double the efforts, because you would have the population of two bodies coming at you. And it also raises the question, can humanity actually cooperate long enough with itself to sit there and do that? Being on a positive view, let's just say yes. And the moon doesn't decide to, try to conquer Earth or vice versa.
Right.
But once the population has gotten to a certain point, it would be feasible to start the heavy construction to do the same process that we just discussed with the moon on Mars. But Mars would have a little bit of different. Mars still has most of its water locked underground. There is a heavy dose of it in the poles, and we see it come out from satellite images every once in a while. it seems that a lot of the water has erupted. It might not be all of what it used to have, but we know the height of the areas, so we could not plant accidentally in the ocean zones and then have the ocean come up. So whenever we start the operations, it might even be a good idea to bring down the two little asteroids. Well, there probably used to be one, but Phobos and etc., and bring them in and go ahead and have them collide artificially, simply so later on during the terraforming project or something like that, it doesn't happen and cause mass amount of damage. Plus, you can also use the material or just drag them out of Mars orbit and take them somewhere and tear them apart and use them for material up for terraforming. You would bring more ice and gas and all the stuff that you would need. So now you have the long rain process. Mars is recovering. Now would come the main question. If there was residual life from when Mars was active and alive before we went and revived it, do we do something to preserve it or do we let it die? Because the question of if the planet will be terraformed, unfortunately, is probably going to be yes regardless. Unless it is some other advanced intelligent species that is hiding underneath of the planet's surface, it will be a definite yes.
So what you're saying, if that life is microbial and not intelligent to a certain degree, then would that make the decision easier?
It will still be an ethical debate, but yes, some of them will still be able to distance it and go, hey, it's not quote unquote animalistic, it's just bacterial, that sort of stuff. Now, if it's actually animalistic, then it would be the question of do we preserve it? And if it's intelligent, and if they even had any sort of, let's go on a real wild thing, say we dig in while we're starting the exterior and the quote unquote Martians that were left notice that, oh, hey, and then they pop their little heads out and they're like, stop terraforming our world. We like our tomb.
That's right. That's right. Because you have to. Any life that would be semi-intelligent, you would have to pause and say, do we have the right to remove this life in favor of what we're going to create here, a terraform Mars? It's some deep thinking when you go that way down the rabbit hole, right?
Yes, it definitely is. Now, my opinion, and unfortunately, I will always look a little bit onto the darker side when it comes to this. The expansion of humanity will probably choose itself. It will come down to that very basic instinct that even if we're subconsciously trying to avoid, it will be preservance of the species. And being that we've done it once, we'll now know that, hey, that is a viable way of doing it. And there will be some sort of a thing in our own biological system. We need to put Earth's biome onto other spots. Once that's done, once that box is open, Pandora's box will not be closed.
Right. That's what I was ready to say. Yeah. It's something you can't just undo.
Now, Mars itself, after it is fully terraformed, colonized, and you've got cities and stuff developing on the outside of it, you have the question of how are you going to designate Mars? What are you going to do with it? What type of representation? The moon, there is, like I was saying, unless something happens where, there's a divide and Earth and the moon like go to war with cultures, or if city-states and, countries and stuff form on the moon, that's always a possibility, but it's closer. So if Earth was, say, a one world government or something like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. If Earth would be sort of like a united Earth, and the people that inhabit the moon would decide to be like a nation states, you would have humanity in sort of a duality role, only playing it out on the moon and the Earth, right?
It would be an old song that's all too familiar to humanity and its past. Even if we somehow found peace here on Earth, something would happen, and most likely, if not on the moon, it will definitely happen when it comes to Mars, because the question will be, look how far away it is. They're going to start looking and being like, well, and even if we manage to do all of this with, and the time constraint was still a major problem, like 6 months, especially if it was still like a 6-month type thing, because then it would have to be mostly independent, and then it would basically look at it and go like, hey, we kind of did this all of our own. Yeah, you may have brought all the resources and otherwise, but we've been taking care of ourselves outside of the things that you've been randomly sending us every 6 months by ourselves. We don't need you. Now, in our scenario, it's become quicker. Travel there is within a few weeks. Let's put it that way. You would have still the question of, would Mars do what the United States did to Britain? Would it look for its own independence to move on and expand and do its own little things? Would it want its own representation? Which, yes, it would if there was some sort of a giant one, and so would the moon and all the others. Because just like when the United States here formed, no taxation without representation would end up going off. Because, yes, the people up there are going to be taxed, or they're going to be taking the Martian material and bringing it to Earth. That would be the whole question of it. And I am sorry to say that, being that all of the material and all the time and all the effort to go in and terraform the planet, to continue the mining operations that would be going on, and all the resource collection, food, so on and so forth, all of that time and effort, Earth, in whatever form of government it would be, even if it stays in the United Nations and its different nation states, would probably not let them go and be independent.
Okay, let's go a little theoretical here for a moment. Say somewhere right now that in the universe, whether it's in our galaxy or another galaxy, there's a planetary system where intelligent life is not on just one planet in the solar system, their solar system, but several. And wouldn't they, each individual, depending on where life arose first, wouldn't that be the basis of some kind of a loose federation?
Basically, it could either be there's multiple ways. Now we're getting into like a more of a political type thing, but you kind of got to when it comes to colonization. Now, for the sake of our little story time when it comes to this sort of thing, let's just say that the United Nations unite into a set of a soft political entity that it is into a more hard, and the former quote unquote nation and nation states become just more states within it. Just kind of think of it as the federal, for people here in the United States, think about it as the federal government with the states.
Right.
But it would be with the United Nations with all the different countries, and then the different countries in and of themselves will go and do different things. But to wage war on one itself, that would be taken out of the question. And then you would have to expand that out to the moon, and then you would have to expand that out, to Mars. Now, the moon, being that even with today's technology, it only takes 3 days to get there. So if they tried to, do something, we would be there within 3 days. And if we're getting material mining in and out, we would be able to get large military grade equipment. So sorry for some sci-fi novels and stuff like that. A rebellion on the moon would probably be squashed pretty quickly and taken very seriously. Now, Mars would be a different question. On a very generous, and we somehow get technology down to like a couple of weeks to start doing this, it's still a couple of weeks for them to prepare, do things. The potential for fighting would be up.
So what you're saying, the further out a planet is, in our case, in our solar system, say we go out way beyond Mars, whatever it is, a protoplanet or whatever we decide we're going to terraform, and for just forget the logistics, it's that far away from the sun. So we're just going to have like a semi-permanent presence there, not a large population. But if some kind of a rebellion happened there, it's going to take a lot longer to respond, right?
Yes, it's going to get a lot harder. So maintaining a quote-unquote single state organization is going to be harder and harder. So a giant empire and stuff like that. It's not impossible. It just makes it harder. It would depend on how you would go across and doing. For some people who know Games Workshop, they will understand the term Imperium, upper term now. That or they haven't. Just because it's in quote-unquote Imperium, it does not mean that it is ruled by an emperor and an empress. Yes, most of the time it is ruled by one of those, but a quote-unquote Imperium is usually a heavy concentration of power in one location, and then it kind of trickles down into multiple different state organizations. So basically, Mars would be free to basically kind of do what it pleases, as long as it's providing to the greater whole of humanity what it needs to be providing.
Right.
And that will be the ultimate way to go about it. Now, if they start doing like some crazy cultist cannibalistic, start eating people, I'm pretty sure something would be done about it.
And see,
Because
it's amazing. It's amazing that we went in this direction. But like you said, it's pretty much unavoidable because of Earth as the base of our solar system, trying to maintain some kind of hold on all these planets or moons or protoplanets, whatever, in the solar system. Earth is still going to say, okay, like you said earlier, we supplied initially the moon, Mars, and wherever else in the solar system. Now you have to have some kind of allegiance to your home planet, right?
yeah, basically. And instead of viewing it to a planet, you would have to do, a quote unquote, and don't be like, oh no, he's supporting fascism and stuff like that. No, I'm just using it
No,
as
that's
an
just it. It's
example.
not. I agree with you. I agree with you, William. It's not about politics. It's not about control, but it's about forming some kind of a union because it's humans here, but it's humans there and out there, and so on and so forth. Because if we do move past our solar system and go elsewhere in the galaxy, that's the way it's got to be. Earth
Obviously.
is home. Right now, it's the only thing that is a constant in our life. This is the only life we know. Carl Sagan said it. I mean, you can imagine that there's alien presence somewhere, and I kind of think there is. But by the same token, when you're dealing with Earth and we move out of our crib, so to speak, and take those baby steps into the solar system and beyond our solar system. You understand where I'm going with this?
Oh no, I actually couldn't say it any better myself when it comes to that. To add to that, to keep in mind, for anybody who's sitting there and going, all utopia, people will be better in the future. People have been saying that and have been preaching that sort of doctrine since the beginning of human civilization.
Right.
And we have not been able to get along since the time of hunter gatherers. There has been some sort of interhuman conflict in the earliest points of the fossil record with Homo sapiens. It is in our nature.
Right. I agree.
And as much as I hate to say it, as a person who prefers a more peaceful existence, it will come and happen in one form or another. People will have their disagreements. And regardless of how well colonization goes, when you get enough people, you're going to get enough of them, enough of the quote unquote flock to go in one direction and then be like, we don't like them anymore, and conflict will go in a rise. When it comes to this subject, that's really all I can much more say about it without really ranting.
Right. Right. I understand completely. It's just the nature. A lot of people when they go down that route, they sort of take one side, like this is man, we're going into space because we've always been fascinated by those little campfires in the distance. But when you actually start doing something practical and move that way, it's like you said, within us, we've always been that way. And when we spread out among the stars, ultimately that's our goal, because to stifle humans just to stay on this planet, that's extinction. Long term, that's extinction. And it's our nature to explore. Always has been, always will be. But the same conflicts we've had with cultures and stuff here on the planet, and even if we move towards a more unified world, once we get out there, it's like a replay, man. It starts all over again because, like you said earlier, the more and more people you get involved, and everybody has individuality, and they look like we're tired of Earth. Earth tells us this. We're out here. We're doing the hard work. What do we need them for? And that's just part of it. And like you said, it's not a utopian view of the future.
It's a realistic view of the future. Because,
Right, right. That's the word I was looking for. Realistic. Well, see,
so,
it just goes back to this. It's we start off the conversation, and it's really strange, like I said, that it went this way, but it had to go this way. And everything sounds good on paper. We as a civilization, and this is no opinion of mine, but it's sort of a fact, because we as a species cannot stay on this planet forever. We have to move out. We cannot stagnate. Our civilization cannot basically be where it's at right now and continue to thrive into the future. And overpopulation, using our resources to extinction, basically. So we have to move out. And people always say we can't solve our own problems here on Earth. What gives us the right to think we can go out there and repeat the same mistakes? We have to do that, or we're done as a species. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to be positive. We have to take those baby steps. As a matter of fact, when most of us, probably most of the people in the audience, were growing up, this is the 21st century. We still have power lines to deliver our electricity. And every time the lightning flashes a couple times or somebody wrecks their car into a telephone pole, we're without power. Now, when I was growing up, I thought, flying cars, okay, all kinds of exotic forms of transport, and yes, us on other planets. And here we are still in the 21st century, and it feels like the 20th to me, even with the technology we got. With the technology of me talking to you tonight and sending it onto my YouTube channel and letting people, wherever they are, at their convenience, listening to it, we're still in the 20th century, right?
Oh, yeah. A simple way to go and also put it sums up everything that we went and just said. Human instinct cannot be changed. It can only be tempered. You can temper it so much, but it is still going to creak up in one form or another. I know that this episode's about colonization, and some of you are probably sitting there thinking, what does this have to do with colonization? It has everything to do with it.
It has everything to do with it.
Yes,
I agree.
Because we need to take a look at all the other times that we have ever colonized elsewhere. The United States was born from colonization. It got tired of the British. It rebelled, and through a lot of effort and time, it won its independence. We granted our independence. We moved out. A lot of stuff has happened. Here we are today. Now we're talking about this. Whenever we go and begin colonization, it will all repeat. Will the same mistakes? Maybe. Hopefully not the same ones. And hopefully bloodshed can be kept down. It's not going to be like how you see in Star Trek, where you have a whole bunch of people all together, because take a look at all of our republics today. A lot of it ends up turning into situations where it's a bunch of arguing and things like that. I mean, heck, look at the British Parliament. They get into heck, there's been a few times where they've gotten into fist fights in the middle of
Right. I've seen that. It's so different the way they do things over there than the way we do here, because when you watch either the Senate or the House, and they appear to be enemies, after the session's over, they go out and have a drink together. Over there, they put no pretense. They just argue and scream. It's like somehow, because it's a political system, and again, I'm not doing politics, but it's a system that is so foreign to us. Basically, it's almost like another world unto itself. Really enjoyed the conversation, William, and look forward to our next discussion.
Oh, yeah. Part 3, I already got a little bit of an idea. I don't want to spoil everybody on that one, but I will give you a hint. It might involve Jupiter.
Jupiter, my second favorite planet in the solar system.
Oh, yeah. It's always fun. But anyways, I'd like to thank everybody who came and listened to this extra long episode. I always love taking the time. And, of course, I always enjoy my conversations with you, Kevin.
Same here, William. Same here. I really enjoyed it. It's what I do. I try to bring something to the table. And again, it's to get people to think, because you cannot change fundamentally without thinking. Thank you, William.
Thank you, Kevin. And everybody, you all enjoy your night.
Well, that wraps it up for episode 3, Colonization. And everybody, please tune in next week around the same time for yet another episode of Into Infinity Talk. I am your host, Kevin Koerber, and I'm out of here.